Here's something nobody tells you about William Wallace. He wasn't some mythical warrior from a movie. He was a real man. He had a wife. He had a reason. And the king who had him killed was so terrified of what Wallace represented that killing him wasn't enough. He needed to destroy him. Peace. Bye. Peace. What I'm about to tell you happened on August 23rd, 1305 in London, England. It's real. It's verified. And by the time this video ends, you'll understand why historians still talk about this execution over 700 years later. Stay with me because the part most people don't know comes right after the execution itself. Before we get to the execution, I need you to understand something about who William Wallace actually was. Because if you only know him from Braveheart, you're missing the real story. He wasn't born a hero. He wasn't a king. He was a minor Scottish knight, nobody particularly important. He had a wife named Marion Braveheart. And according to historical accounts, Marion was murdered by an English sheriff named William de Heselrigge. Think about that for a second. The man who would go on to terrify the most powerful king in Britain started because someone killed the woman he loved. After Marion's death, Wallace tracked de Heselrigge down and killed him. That single act of revenge lit the fire. He went from an unknown knight to a wanted man overnight, and instead of hiding, he kept going. Now here's where it gets bigger. In 1296, King Edward I, nicknamed Longshanks, had invaded Scotland and declared himself its king. He even stole Scotland's most sacred object, the Stone of Destiny, the ancient coronation stone of Scottish kings, and dragged it back to Westminster Abbey in London. Scotland's nobles surrendered. Scotland's lords bent the knee. But Wallace? Wallace raised an army. Farmers. Commoners. Men with nothing but anger and spears. And in 1297, at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, he destroyed a much larger English force, drove them out of Scotland, became Guardian of Scotland. One man with no royal blood had humiliated the most powerful king in Britain. Edward never forgot it. He spent the next 8 years doing one thing, hunting William Wallace down. Now here's the part of this story that gets under my skin. For years, Wallace evaded capture, fighting guerrilla wars, vanishing into the Scottish Highlands. Edward crushed Scotland militarily, bribed nobles, and issued rewards. And still, Wallace slipped away. Until August 5th, 1305. He was betrayed. Near Glasgow, a Scottish knight named Sir John de Menteith, a man Wallace may have trusted, handed him over to the English. No final battle, no heroic last stand, just a quiet deal made in the dark by someone on the same side. Wallace was taken to London in chains. And here's where Edward showed exactly what kind of king he was. He refused to even look at him in person. A so-called trial was held at Westminster Hall on August 22, 1305. It lasted a matter of hours. Wallace was charged with treason, murder, and sacrilege. When he tried to speak to point out that he had never sworn loyalty to Edward and therefore could not commit treason against him, he was silenced. No defense was heard. The verdict had already been decided. Guilty. The sentence, death. But not a clean death. The worst death the English crown could legally design. And here's what that actually meant, because most people have no idea how bad this was. The morning of August 23rd, 1305. Wallace was stripped and bound to a horse-drawn hurdle, a wooden frame, and dragged through the streets of London for nearly 4 miles, from the Tower of London to a place called Smithfield. The streets were lined with thousands of people. Some threw things, some spat, some just watched in silence. By the time he arrived at Smithfield, he was battered, torn, and bleeding from the street, but still alive, because dying on the way there would have been mercy, and mercy was not part of the sentence. The sentence was called hanged, drawn, and quartered, the most extreme punishment in all of medieval England. 5 stages, and here's what each one meant. Stage 1. He was hanged by the neck, but not until he was dead, until he was barely conscious, until his body was on the edge of shutting down. Then they cut him down. Stage 2. While still alive, he was emasculated and disemboweled. His entrails were removed from his body and burned in front of his eyes. Stage 3. Beheaded. Stage 4. His body was cut into 4 pieces. Quartered. And stage 5, this is the part Edward clearly spent time thinking about. His head was dipped in tar to preserve it and mounted on a spike on London Bridge. His right arm was sent to Newcastle, his left arm to Berwick, his right leg to Perth, and his left leg to Stirling. Stirling, the exact city where Wallace had crushed the English army 8 years earlier. Edward didn't send that leg there by accident. That was a message. Edward believed that by putting William Wallace in pieces across Britain, he would put the idea of Scotland resisting him in pieces too. He was wrong, and the reason why is the part most videos leave out. Within months of Wallace's execution, Robert the Bruce rose and renewed the fight for Scottish independence. In 1314, at the Battle of Bannockburn, Scotland defeated England so decisively that Edward's son, Edward II, fled the battlefield on horseback. It was one of the most humiliating military defeats in English history. King Edward I never saw it. He died in 1307, still marching north, still trying to finish what one Scottish knight had started. Think about what Edward actually achieved. He executed a man publicly, in the most brutal way his kingdom could design, and scattered the pieces across Britain as a warning. And every Scottish community that received a piece of William Wallace did not cower. They remembered. They burned. Today, there is a 220-foot monument to William Wallace standing at Stirling, the city where he first broke England's army, and the same city where Edward sent his leg as a final insult. 700 years later, Wallace's name is taught in schools, carved in stone, and spoken with pride. Edward wanted the world to see a broken man in pieces. What the world saw instead was exactly what Edward was afraid of. A man who could not be broken.